Let's talk about the introductory exposition for Yakuza 6. That's these videos here. We're going to get contentious. I didn't like them at all. I had to stop playing the game twice trying to get through this tutorial sequence because it was awful. I know that a lot of people are going to disagree with me on that. That's fine. So, Yakuza has always been too front-loaded for me. They always have too many introductory cinematics, but usually the cinematics team and the writing team work together so that the emotions and tensions that are raised by the cinematics get driven back into the game world so that you always feel like there is an investment, right? Oh, this emotional thing is happening and it matters. Oh, this emotional thing is happening and I'm going to do something about it. Oh, this emotional thing is happening and I'm going to be able to rail against it or pursue it or whatever else, right? That's critical. That reinvestment of that energy is what makes those cinematics pay off. If you don't reinvest the energy, it just kind of boils away, and then the player is left like, why did we watch that? That's what happens here. Yakuza 6 never bothers to reinvest that energy. It makes a couple of very minor stabs at it, never actually connects. In the previous episodes, I've talked about these videos up here, and I said, you got to know what you want. You got to know what you want to say. You got to know how you want to change the player's tension level, and you got to roll forward from the previous event into the next event. You've got to do something, and you got to do the right thing. And that's the point here. In order to make these cinematics work, you have to be trying to accomplish something worthwhile. A cinematic that just kind of is pretty on its own doesn't accomplish anything. Each of these cinematics is pretty on its own, but they don't accomplish anything. And that makes it very hard for me to talk about them with any kind of, oh, look at the lighting, oh, look at the way that they've framed this. It's like, yeah, but it doesn't do anything. It doesn't go anywhere. It's art because they didn't have anything worthwhile to say, so it's empty. It's hollow shots. They're gilding a turd. The writing team handed them a giant platter of turds and said, gild all of these for us, polish all of these for us. And they tried, and boy, I did not like it. Let's talk about why this narrative fails, where so many other narratives in Yakuza worked fine. And it's almost entirely about the emotional energy and the failure to properly invest it. Now, a big part of that is the fact that this is Yakuza 6, and it's supposed to be Kiryu's last big hurrah. So everybody that's ever had any contact with Kiryu shows up for some amount of time. Unfortunately, that amount of time is all in these introductory cutscenes, and then they never appear again. Here's Majima and Goro. Hope you liked seeing them for 3 minutes. They never appear again. Here's all the children at the orphanage. Hope you like seeing them for 4 or 5 hours. That's how long these are, right? 4 or 5 hours. And then you never see them again. Here's Haruko. Hope you like her. She gets a full emotional arc. And then you never see her again. I mean, technically you do. And at the end of the game, she is important. But this is all about the amount of time spent on these characters. Obviously, these characters are important to Kiryu as a person. In order to define who he is as a person, these characters are useful benchmarks, right? Kazuma owns an orphanage or manages an orphanage, and that says a lot about who he is and what his priorities are. But it's a matter of how much time you spend doing that. Like up here, I talked about how Nagumo has a lot of lines, way too many lines for an extra, right? That's because Nagumo has importance to the entire story. He shows up over and over and over again. And that's why they give him so many lines. They're establishing him as existing in this world, because he does. If we wanted to do something that accomplished the same stuff with a less important character, with a throwaway character, we wouldn't give them that many lines. It wouldn't be the right approach. We would shorten everything down. We would trim it down. We'd get the emotional beats a little bit tighter, a little bit less smooth, just because there's no reason to waste that much time on a character that's never going to show up again. They waste a lot of time on characters that are never going to show up again, and clearly it's an indulgence. Clearly this is because they expect people to play Yakuza 6 coming in off of Yakuza 0 through 5, and it's like, yeah, look, it's fan service. And maybe that's how you took it. Maybe that's why people are okay with these cutscenes. But to me, those characters were all wastes. They were all far too heavy for the amount of actual narrative burden. And then they never bothered to reinvest any of that energy anyway. So we're going to go over these, not in terms of what the cutscenes actually do from a cinematics perspective. We're going to go back to that when we get to the cinematics that suck less. But we're going to go through it from a narrative perspective. We're going to talk about what these do and why the reinvestment doesn't work, in my opinion. And when I say reinvestment, I mean we get these emotional stakes and then they just boil away into nothing. Now, these videos here are centered mostly on Haruka, this lady. She is basically your daughter. She's an adopted kid, and you've taken her under your wing, and she considers you her dad, and you consider her your daughter, and she gets to be an idol in one of the previous games. And the driving factor in that game was the fact that you're kind of a Yakuza goon, and if anybody finds out, her idol career is not going to go well. So she spends a lot of that game distancing herself from you so that she can have her idol career. And, she's conflicted about it. And the point of the game is that at the end of the game, she accepts you and she publicly announces to the world that she is Kazuma Kiryu's daughter. And anybody who knows who Kazuma Kiryu is will now know who his daughter is. And there's no doubt about that because she did it live on stage in the middle of her set, and it was covered across the world by anybody who's ever covered anything. We'll get to that later. Anyhow, that's actually a really fun beat. I mean, it was from a previous game, so they just kind of inherited it. But when that beat happens, Kazuma has been stabbed, so he gets to go to hospital, and they arrest him, and everybody's like, yeah, sure, they arrested him on charges of like larceny or whatever, but that's just bullshit, right? That's any lawyer could get him out of that because everybody knows that what actually happened was, helicopters firing rockets and shit. But Kazuma decides that if Haruko is going to say that, she accepts him, he better be worth accepting. So he's going to go to jail for 3 years and wash off all the blood and Yakuza stink. Now, obviously, this is a dumb decision, but it's a really powerful one, and it works perfectly. Whoa! Holy shit! Lightning just hit my neighbors. It works perfectly. So, Kazuma is not the brightest bulb, and him choosing to go to jail for 3 years to wash off the Yakuza stink is really a good choice. And it merges really well with the themes of this game, which is that you need to spend time with your family. And just kind of assuming that your family is your family because you happen to be family isn't going to work out well. So Kazuma makes the same mistakes as all of the major villains in this game. And that is wonderful. That is the point. Anyhow, then they have these. So what are these, you might be asking? Well, Haruko goes back to the Yakuza orphanage, but she's world famous now. Everybody knows who she is and who her dad is. So people say that her Yakuza orphanage is a Yakuza orphanage, and she gets upset, and she mopes, and she mopes, and she mopes, and then she ditches them, and then she mopes some more, and then she leaves. Now, this is an emotional sequence. They do it fairly well. They build Haruko's tension and grief really well in these beats, and you come to the end of this thinking, oh, I really care about what's happening to Haruko. So how do you reinvest that high level of energy into the game? 3 years later, Kazuma comes back, and he walks into the orphanage, and he finds out Haruko is missing. So he talks to people, and then he talks to people. Then he goes to the city to talk to people. Then he goes to the city to talk to people. Then he goes to the city to talk to people. Then he goes to the city to talk to people. Then he goes to the city to talk to people. Then he finds Haruko. Except she's not awake. So all of that energy where we care about what happens to Haruko didn't get reinvested fast enough. It got delayed, and it got delayed, and it got delayed, and it boiled away because we're not getting the power of that connection. You can't say, this is so important, this matters. 3 years later, another person talked a lot. It's not working. Your focus isn't good enough. You need to reinvest it promptly and efficiently. You can say 3 years later if the 3 years later is the point. Like, you say 3 years later and then you show Haruka holding a baby. Just like, bam. People will go, oh, my heart. This is so amazing. But saying 3 years later, here's another person not doing anything important, spending a ton of time on screen talking to people who are never going to appear again and never going to matter. It didn't reinvest it. It didn't work out. And of course, the journey through the city to these various places is also completely worthless. It accomplishes nothing. It's literally Kiryu going up to people and saying, hey, have you seen this lady? And them going no, and him moving on. And the point is that the people he asks are from the previous games. So you get more people popping in from the previous games for shits and giggles. And that's just not emotionally relevant. It never really drives the story in any significant way. Now, maybe this is because the whole story feels kind of compressed. It really feels like it was a 40-hour game that got condensed, and I think maybe that made these opening elements suffer quite a bit. And I haven't even mentioned the fact that one of these cutscenes is about a tremendous fire that has nothing to do with anything. It's just like, yeah, there's this important thing where the most important girl in the world left on her own and vanished, and nobody knows where the fuck she is. And Kazuma's going to go look for her. And also, 2 years ago, a whole bunch of buildings burned down. Great use of your emotional flow there, guys. Oh, yeah. You can see why, from my perspective, these videos don't cut it. I don't want to go around saying, if I was the director, I would have done. But it does feel like this could have been much, much tighter. And in most Yakuza games, it is. In most Yakuza games, it feels right. It feels proper. It feels like you're getting that emotional payoff and you're pushing it into the game, and you feel invested in the game when you come out of it. But at the end of this, I feel like they've taken me on a tour of people I already knew and then told me I'd have to babysit for a while. Well, in the next episode, we'll move on to videos again, things I like again. But I had to get that out of my system. I really don't like most of the videos in this chapter. They don't connect to anything. They're visually very beautiful. Cinematics team, A+ job. Writing team, D. Very bad. See me after class. Because I'm sure that they wrote it trying to please me, right? See you around. Hopefully the lightning won't hit me.